On a Sunday morning, on American national television, the world held its breath. After just 10 days of a brutal, costly war, America had quietly asked for a ceasefire. It had blinked first. The feed from Tehran flickers, then stabilizes. The Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, looks directly into the camera, his expression calm, almost detached. Instead of quiet diplomacy, he delivers a message that shatters the global order. He states plainly that Iran has no request for a ceasefire. In that instant, the price of oil didn't just rise, it ignited, screaming past $100 a barrel for the first time in 4 years. Your gas prices jumped 17% in a week. But the rejection on live television, the spiking oil chart, that isn't the real story. The real question, the one being asked in hushed tones on trading floors and in military war rooms, was far more disturbing. Why, after only 10 days, was America asking for a ceasefire in the first place? The answer to that question, the one being asked in hushed tones from trading floors to military war rooms, had a code name, Operation Epic Fury. To understand why America blinked first, we go back 10 days to February 28th, 2026. The concept in the briefings was clear, a scaled-up replay of the Soleimani strike, this time against the broader IRGC command structure. On operations screens, aircraft tracks arced towards those nodes. Icons blinked, then vanished as precision bombs found their coordinates. Cut off the head, and the regime's body would buckle in days. But the calculus was already broken. Iran spent those years learning from past blows, spreading command across multiple centers, and pre-delegating authority so units could fight on even if senior figures were gone. Communications were built with redundancy, not ceremony. Later CESIS analysis spelled it out. You can't decapitate a system that no longer has a single neck. The regime didn't fold. It answered. Within hours, Gulf radar scopes were filling with launch tracks. First dozens, then hundreds. Over the next 10 days, Iran fired more than 500 ballistic missiles and 2,000 drones. A swarm meant not to slip past defenses, but to bury them under sheer volume. What had begun as a precision strike campaign turned into a grinding contest of magazines and stamina. US air defenses, the most sophisticated layered system on the planet, started throwing everything they had at the sky. Patriot and SM-3 batteries cycled through salvo after salvo until launchers stood half empty, then bare. In just a few days, an estimated $1.7 billion worth of interceptors had left their tubes, leaving rows of silent canisters where active shields had been. It still wasn't enough. The saturation worked. It showed up in satellite photos of the THAAD radar site in Qatar. $1 billion asset reduced to a smoldering scar on the sand. Then came the cost that never shows up on balance sheets. 7 American service members killed in those 10 days. 7 flag-draped coffins, a reminder that every intercepted trajectory has a crew that may or may not come home. Within 10 days, Operation Epic Fury had failed on its own promises. There was no swift regime collapse, only depleted defenses, dead personnel, and a Gulf energy corridor suddenly charged with risk. Oil futures jumped, volatility spiked, and shippers moving crude through the Gulf began repricing every voyage. Under that pressure, Washington was forced to quietly ask Tehran for a pause. That explains America's desperation. The more dangerous question is why Iran, holding the stronger position, looked at that ceasefire offer and said no. The reason Iran said no wasn't about squeezing a better deal out of the present fight. It went back to a lesson from the past, written in blood. And the clearest explanation for that decision surfaced, of all places, on live American network television. On NBC, the lower third banner carried his name, Abbas Araghchi, Iranian Foreign Minister. Studio lights washed the desk as the anchor leaned in and asked in clear English, "Minister Araghchi, the US says it offered a ceasefire. Why did Iran reject it?" He let a beat of silence hang, hands folded. He glanced at the anchor once, then shifted his eyes to the camera and stayed there, speaking straight to the audience. And with cold clarity, he said, "We are not asking for a ceasefire. The fact is that we don't have any positive experience of negotiating with the United States. Every time, they attacked us in the middle of the negotiations." He wasn't improvising. Inside Tehran's narrative, those sentences point to specific dates. According to Iranian officials, in June 2025, while negotiations with Washington were underway, US forces attacked them mid-talk. That sequence, talks on, then strikes, became the reference point they never forgot. Stop on that timing for a second. For Iran's leadership, June 2025 wasn't just a bad memory, it was the blueprint. Agree to talks, signal willingness to compromise, and watch the other side move under that cover. And then, in their telling, it happened again. In February 2026, while another round of negotiations was in motion, Tehran says US attacks landed mid-talk again. One incident can be written off as miscalculation. 2, with the same talk then strike sequence harden into doctrine. That's when the negotiating table stops looking like a risk and starts looking like the kill box. Miss that shift, and you miss why this conflict feels structurally impossible to end. Which is why Araghchi's next line on NBC wasn't a plea, it was an ultimatum. He stayed locked on the lens and spelled it out. This doesn't work like this. There needs to be a permanent end to the war. Unless we get to that, we need to continue fighting. Here is the gap that actually matters. For Washington's planners, a ceasefire is a pause button, a tactical timeout to reset positions and options. For Tehran, after June 2025 and February 2026, a ceasefire has become the moment before impact, the signal that the next strike is coming. On one side, it's a tool of crisis management. On the other, it's the kill switch of a trap they believe they've already walked into twice. Seen through those dates, Iran's refusal stops looking like irrational aggression and starts to read as grim risk management. Iran rejected the ceasefire after what Tehran counts as 2 attacks landing in the middle of negotiations. Was that prudence in avoiding a trap, or overreach that locked in a longer war? In your view, how should that decision be priced? Leave your read in the comments, and that stark difference in definition feels like it solves the puzzle of why Iran said no. It explains the logic of the decision from the outside. But even if the United States had offered a permanent end to the war on Iran's terms, the deal still would have been impossible, because the real obstacle wasn't in the White House. It was buried deep inside Iran's own guarded power structure. That hidden obstacle, deep inside Iran's power structure, is what analysts call a two-headed state. One head is the elected government that signs communiques. The other is the Revolutionary Guard security apparatus with its own chain of command. In any negotiation, the real question isn't what do they want. It's which head is actually in control. You saw that divide. President Masoud Pezeshkian at a podium, flags behind him, reading a calm apology to Gulf capitals for civilian deaths. While at that same moment, in an IRGC operations room with no flags, just monitors, maps and clipped radio chatter, a commander signed off on the next missile and drone wave. That split screen isn't a glitch. It is the architecture. The Atlantic Council's work on Iran's structure describes a dual-track command. The political leadership and foreign ministry on one track, the Revolutionary Guard on another, reporting through a separate chain authorized to keep military pressure running even while talks are underway. The design is a long war where negotiations never become a moment of vulnerability, so a diplomat can walk out of a palace in Geneva holding a ceasefire agreement, cameras flashing, while the commanders who control the missiles are not structurally bound by that signature. The paper says stop. The parallel chain keeps going. For markets, that gap between the signature and the trigger finger, that unsolvable knot, shows up as whiplash. A ceasefire headline hits your screen, crude sells off, shipping risk premia ease, and risk assets exhale because traders assume the gun is off the table. Then an IRGC unit, operating on its own track, launches another strike. Tanker routes are repriced, insurance costs jump. Oil snaps back through the levels that just got sold, and anyone who traded the headline instead of the structure is on the wrong side. That's why this paralysis isn't just a diplomatic drama. It is the machine that keeps generating volatility and mispricing in your portfolio. The edge isn't guessing the next ceasefire press conference. It's positioning around the structural pattern that one chain of command can promise come, while another still has the authority to fire. Next, we turn that pattern into a concrete framework for how you allocate so you're not trading headlines, you're trading the machine that creates them. So how does this engine of volatility work? At its core, it's driven by one structural flaw. Washington and Tehran don't mean the same thing when they say ceasefire. That gap is what actually matters. The US and its allies treat a ceasefire as a binding end to fighting. For Iran, it's a tactical pause. Janus Henderson analysts point to this gap as the mechanism that keeps calm fragile and escalation likely. The frustrating part? It's a known design failure, yet policymakers keep running the same playbook and markets keep paying for it. When that mismatch eventually blows up a ceasefire, Iran leans on its leverage in the Gulf, naval signaling and proxy activity near key shipping lanes, raising perceived risk around the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most critical energy choke point. Markets don't wait for a blockage. They price even a small chance that tankers in that narrow channel could be delayed or hit. You've felt this before. Fuel costs jump. Energy holdings whipsaw on Gulf headlines. About 20% of global oil supply, roughly 20 million barrels a day, moves through Hormuz. And in one Morgan Stanley scenario of a prolonged regional conflict, they model how disruption there could push crude back above $100 a barrel. It's the same script time and again when tensions flare near the strait. That sequence, ceasefire breakdown, Gulf tension, crude spike, is the recurring oil price reality check again that seasoned investors expect. The first order hit is simple. Markets price the risk barrels can't move freely through Hormuz, and crude jumps. The second order impact hits portfolios. Energy and shipping equities whip around, inflation and rate expectations rise, and broader risk assets derate as margins get squeezed. Once you recognize that chain, you stop treating each flare-up as an isolated crisis and start treating it as a repeatable pattern. Incompatible ceasefire definitions lead to breakdown. Hormuz risk rises, oil reprices, and portfolio volatility follows. The strategic question is how you want your capital positioned the next time those signals flash, whether you're along for the shock or using this framework to navigate the cycle. So how do you navigate this? You start by validating your skepticism. Official diplomatic narratives promising progress on ceasefires often ignore the history of supposed breakthroughs that were later abandoned, which is exactly what makes the language itself non-credible. Here's the gap that actually matters. Washington defines progress as verifiable de-escalation. Tehran, conditioned by episodes like the unilateral US withdrawal from the JCPOA in 2018, expects the next reversal. That expectation gap is where diplomatic rhetoric dies and market reality begins. The entire JCPOA cycle, from signing to withdrawal to failed revivals, is one case study in headline progress, followed by renewed escalation and volatility. This recurring pattern, the expectation gap and the JCPOA cycle together, confirms what many of you privately suspect. You watch it repeat and ask, when will they learn? The strategic answer is that they won't. The pattern isn't a flaw in the system. The pattern is the system. Once you accept that, risk management has to shift away from talk and toward how the market prices danger. While headlines fixate on a handshake in Oman, you watch three dials. First, Gulf shipping insurance rates, the premium to insure a tanker leaving port. When risk rises, that spread widens. Second, regional or energy-linked volatility indices that jump when traders hedge against bad outcomes. Third, crude and key refined product prices, tracked for sudden spikes or persistent premia that fundamentals alone don't justify. The Council on Foreign Relations Global Conflict Tracker doesn't price assets. It logs the timing and intensity of clashes around Iran. Line that conflict timeline up with stalled or collapsed talks and a pattern emerges. Negotiations stall. Kinetic activity picks up. Oil price volatility follows. That chain bleeds into higher shipping insurance, elevated volatility readings, and stressed energy markets. Signals that care far less about press conferences than actual risk. But this predictable cycle of tension and relief doesn't operate in a vacuum. It channels money, influence, and leverage for players far beyond Washington and Tehran. The question is, who profits from keeping this stalemate in place? That answer opens a hidden layer of the conflict most official narratives never touch. Because this stalemate is not a bug in the system, it is the system. The conflict is a load to grind on because for other global powers, this chaos is not a crisis, but a strategic opportunity. Picture the global chessboard. At the center, the noisy fight between the United States and Iran. Off to the side in Moscow, officers sit in a windowless operations room, watching feeds and satellite tracks of US forces. According to US officials cited by PBS News in March 2026, Russian intelligence is supplying Tehran with real-time data, including satellite imagery of American troop movements. The logic is simple. Help Iran keep the pressure on just enough to bleed American resources and attention in another forever war. One more forever war, hitting the portfolio through higher defense spending, fatter risk premia, and a Washington with less bandwidth. Further east in Beijing, the approach is quieter. In place of war rooms, ministries and state firms push export approvals through the bureaucracy. On the surface, China calls for peace. In practice, it gains from a United States bogged down in another Middle Eastern theater. Analysts at the Washington Institute argue that a prolonged stalemate erodes US standing, diverts its military focus, and opens space for Russian and Chinese leverage. For China, that includes dual-use technology exports, systems that fit inside civilian projects but can also aid Iran's war effort. That support boosts Tehran's capabilities and deepens its economic dependence on Beijing, even as China poses as a neutral broker. This is the gap that actually matters. With no major power invested in a resolution,
the stalemate hardens and regional stability becomes a casualty.
It becomes another line item in the risk portfolio. Instability in a key energy corridor that keeps risk premia on oil and regional assets high. On the ground, that same line item means families pushed from their homes by sporadic strikes, small businesses suffocated by uncertainty, border towns living off checkpoints and smuggling. But on this grand chessboard, the pieces being moved, the pawns being sacrificed, are not made of wood or ivory. They are real people in real towns whose lives are being systematically dismantled by this game. For the people in Tehran, the game is not a metaphor. The dismantling of their lives begins with the taste of the air. A metallic chemical tang catches in the back of the throat. The residue of burning oil depots carried in from miles away, under a Sunday morning sky that hangs sickly grey. A siren winds down somewhere beyond the rooftops. The silence it leaves feels heavier than the noise. Moments later, the rain starts. It's not water. Black rain streaks down window panes, leaving oily threads along the curb. On one balcony, a woman yanks her laundry back inside. Dark spots blooming on the white cloth. Below her, a shopkeeper pushes a squeegee through puddles at his door. Another account is settled thousands of miles away, on a cold tarmac, where 7 coffins slide down the rails from a cargo plane. The honor guard lifts each one in unison, boots scratching on the concrete. The units here are not drops of rain, but the weight of wood and cloth. Flags are folded with practiced precision, corners aligned, the fabric snapping once in the wind before it disappears into tight triangles. A mother grips hers, knuckles whitening. Beside her, a man presses the bundle to his chest and stares ahead, jaw locked. None of this appears on a market screen. The burn in a child's lungs, the weight of a flag that will never be opened again. The bill lands on people who never chose any of it. That is what a war of attrition feels like on the ground. Each side certain the other will break first, certain its own resolve is harder. History has a word for wars like that. And the word isn't complicated. The reality is simpler and far more tragic. The war grinds on, locked in a cycle of incompatible necessities. America cannot offer the permanent guarantee that Iran demands. From Washington's perspective, that would be an admission of strategic failure, handing ammunition to critics. It's a price no administration believes it can pay, even as the long-term bill keeps rising. And in Tehran, anything less than a permanent solution is seen as suicide. Recent history has taught them one lesson. You do not trust pauses Washington can end. They watched a nuclear deal they had signed painstakingly negotiated torn up by the next administration. For them, any temporary ceasefire Washington can reverse isn't peace. It's just a rearming period. Two powers, each convinced it is right, each waiting for the other to break first under the grinding logic of attrition. This is the pattern of a war of attrition. Time, casualties, and economic pain become weapons. Victory is defined not by decisive gains, but by who can endure the bleeding longer. History has a word for wars where both sides believe the other will give in first. A war of attrition. It is not a short word, and it is not a cheap one. Conflicts like this don't just exhaust nations. They keep markets off balance, from energy to risk premiums. If this framework for seeing through the headlines was useful, subscribe for more analysis that connects global events to your financial reality. And thank you for watching.